Today, we're digging into a really dramatic Supreme Court case, GR No. 119417. It's a story where a violent death sparks a fierce courtroom battle over one huge question. Was this a cold-blooded murder, or was it a desperate act of self-defense? That line between who's the victim and who's the aggressor gets incredibly blurry.
So, to really get a grip on this, we're going to approach it just like a legal digest. We'll start by looking at the two totally different stories of what happened. Then, we'll zero in on the key question from the appeal. And finally, we'll unpack the Supreme Court's verdict and the powerful logic that got them there.
All right, let's set the scene. It all goes down on the morning of February 8, 1993. A man named Eduardo Alberto is killed. That much is a fact. But how it happened, well, as you're about to see, there are two starkly different versions of that story.
And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the conflict. The whole case is basically balanced on a knife's edge between two opposing realities. On one hand, the prosecution describes this as a brutal, out-of-the-blue ambush. But on the other hand, the defense claims that the accused, Omar Varona Jr., was doing nothing more than fighting for his own life.
Now, the trial court ended up giving its full belief to the prosecution's side of the story. This timeline, which was backed up by eyewitnesses, paints this really clear, step-by-step picture of a relentless and, frankly, merciless assault on a man who was just trying to get away.
So, after the trial court finds Varona guilty of murder, he doesn't just accept it. He takes his case to a higher court. And his appeal wasn't about getting bogged down in minor details. He focused the entire thing on one single, fundamental question.
And that's it. That's the whole ballgame. Varona's entire appeal hangs on this one question. It basically forces the Supreme Court to make a choice. Was this a justifiable act of self-preservation, or did the lower court get it right?
So the Supreme Court takes the case. They meticulously go through everything, all the evidence, every piece of testimony from the trial. And after weighing all the arguments, they delivered their final, definitive word on the appeal.
The court saw absolutely no reason to overturn the decision. They affirmed the conviction, finding Omar Cleto Varona Jr. guilty of the crime of murder beyond any and all reasonable doubt. Okay, so the verdict is guilty. But the most important part is understanding why. We need to get into the ratio decidendi, which is just the legal term for the core reasoning behind the decision. Why did the court so completely shut down the claim of self-defense? Let's break it down. First, let's talk about what self-defense actually is in the eyes of the law. You see, it's what's called an affirmative allegation. That means the second an accused person admits, yes, I did the killing, but adds, but I was defending myself, the entire burden of proof flips. It's now completely on them to prove their actions were justified.
And proving self-defense is tough. The law sets a really high bar. It's like a three-part test, and you have to pass all three. If you're missing even one of these elements, these pillars, your entire defense just collapses.
You know, the trial court didn't just disagree with the defense's story. They threw it out in the strongest way possible. They literally called the entire self-defense theory an out-and-out fabrication, meaning they thought it was completely made up with no credible evidence to back it.
And this, right here, is the nail in the coffin. The entire defense argument just fell apart because the court found zero credible evidence that the victim, Eduardo Alberto, started any kind of unlawful aggression. And without that first element, the other two don't even matter. Legally, the claim of self-defense just can't exist.
So you might be asking, why was this murder and not a lesser crime, like homicide? Well, the key is a legal concept called treachery, or alavazia. And what this really tells us is that in the eyes of the law, how you commit a crime can be just as important as the act itself.
When you look at the facts, you can see exactly how the court found that treachery was present. The attack was sudden. The victim was helpless. Varona deliberately took advantage of Alberto's defenseless state, kneeling, begging for his life, to kill him without any risk to himself. The sheer number of wounds just cemented this idea of a merciless intent. Now, this case is more than just a tragic story. It actually serves as a really important precedent, and it reinforces several crucial legal principles and doctrines in Philippine law that are still brought up in courtrooms today. So, the key takeaways here are crystal clear. First, if you claim self-defense, the burden to prove it is massive. Second, what the trial judge thinks about who's telling the truth carries enormous weight. And third, treachery can happen even during a chase, as long as that final attack is on someone who can't fight back. These aren't just technical details, they're fundamental principles that help make sure our justice system works.
So what did this all mean for Varona in the end?
With the murder conviction upheld, the Supreme Court also had to finalize his punishment.
The court upheld the original sentence. Varona was sentenced to reclusion perpetua, which is one of the most severe penalties you can get in the Philippine legal system. And on top of that lifelong prison sentence, he was also ordered to pay 75,000 pesos to the victim's family.
And so this case really leaves us with a deep question about the nature of evidence itself. It makes you think about how our justice system handles that tough situation where two completely opposite realities collide in a courtroom, and it has to somehow decide which one is the truth beyond a reasonable doubt.